In 1917, one accident in a Canadian harbor created the largest man-made explosion in history up to that point, so violent that scientists building the atomic bomb almost 30 years later studied its wreckage to predict what Hiroshima would look like. A single collision between two ships turned a quiet port city into a wasteland in under 20 seconds. Windows shattered 100 miles away. A solid iron ship anchor shaft, weighing half a ton, flew more than 2 miles and buried itself in the ground. Nearly 2,000 people died in an instant, and thousands more were blinded by flying glass as they stood watching from their own windows. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a wartime cargo mix-up became a blueprint for nuclear destruction, and how it quietly changed medicine forever. It started as an ordinary Thursday morning. On December 6, 1917, the French cargo ship SS Mont Blanc entered the narrow channel of Halifax Harbour in Nova Scotia, Canada, packed floor to ceiling with wartime explosives, TNT, picric acid, gunkathon, and drums of flammable benzol lashed to the deck. Coming the other way was the Norwegian ship SS IMO, running behind schedule and moving faster than it should have through the crowded strait known as the Narrows. Both captains tried to signal their intentions. Both misjudged the other's path. At 8:45 am, the IMO's bow sliced directly into the Mont Blanc's hull. The impact itself was almost gentle, barely enough to sink a ship. But sparks from the scraping metal ignited benzol vapor leaking across the deck, and within minutes, the Mont Blanc was burning uncontrollably, drifting toward the docks of a city that had no idea what was floating toward it. Here's the cruel twist: nobody ran. The burning Mont Blanc drifted toward Pier 6, and instead of fleeing, hundreds of Halifax residents did the opposite. Office workers, dockhands, and schoolchildren pressed against their windows to watch the spectacle of a ship engulfed in flame. Nobody had told them it was a floating bomb, because the ship's dangerous cargo was a wartime secret, and Halifax itself was a bustling hub for Allied convoys crossing the Atlantic. Meanwhile, a railway dispatcher named Vince Coleman learned the horrifying truth from a fleeing colleague. Instead of running himself, Coleman stayed at his telegraph key and sent an urgent message down the line, warning an incoming passenger train to stop outside the city. His last transmission read, in part, that a munitions ship was on fire and making for the pier. Coleman died at his post seconds later. The train, carrying nearly 300 people, heeded the warning and stopped just far enough away to survive. At 9:04:35 that morning, the Mont Blanc detonated. The blast released energy equivalent to roughly 3,000 tons of TNT, the most powerful explosion humans had ever engineered before nuclear weapons existed. A fireball rose over a mile into the sky. The ship itself vaporized, hurling one of its cannon barrels more than 3 miles and a giant piece of its anchor shaft in the opposite direction. The Richmond district of Halifax, home to thousands, was flattened within seconds, every building reduced to splinters and rubble across an area of roughly a square mile. A shockwave of compressed air raced outward, followed instantly by a tsunami-like wave that swept survivors off the shoreline. Almost every person who had gathered at those windows to watch the fire was struck by a hail of shattered glass, driven inward at lethal speed by the force of the blast. Survivors barely had time to grasp what happened before nature turned against them too. Roughly 2,000 people were dead, another 9,000 injured, and tens of thousands suddenly homeless in the freezing December air. Rescue crews dug through wreckage searching for survivors trapped beneath collapsed homes, some of which had caught fire from overturned stoves. Then, less than 24 hours later, a full blizzard swept in off the Atlantic, dumping over a foot of snow on the ruined city. Rescue efforts nearly stalled entirely. Injured people lay buried under snow-covered debris, while temperatures plummeted below freezing. Relief trains from Boston, loaded with doctors, nurses, and supplies, pushed through the storm to reach Halifax within 18 hours, an act of cross-border generosity Nova Scotia still honors today by sending Boston a giant Christmas tree every single year, a tradition unbroken for decades. Now here's where the disaster reshaped an entire field of medicine. Because so many people had been watching through glass windows at the moment of detonation, the explosion produced an almost unbelievable number of severe eye injuries. Somewhere around 600 people lost an eye, and dozens lost both. Doctors from across North America rushed to Halifax to treat wounds unlike anything they had seen at that scale. Among them was a young surgeon named William Ladd, who spent weeks treating Halifax's youngest victims, children crushed under collapsed buildings, and mutilated by flying debris. That grueling experience transformed his entire career. Ladd went on to become the founding figure of pediatric surgery in the United States, pioneering techniques specifically for operating on children's smaller, more fragile bodies. A single catastrophic morning in a Canadian harbour quietly gave birth to an entire modern medical specialty. For nearly 3 decades, the Halifax Explosion held a grim record, the largest deliberate, human-caused explosion on Earth. Then came the Manhattan Project. As physicists raced to build the first atomic bomb in the early 1940s, they faced a genuine problem. Nobody had ever detonated anything close to the scale they were planning, so nobody could reliably predict what the blast damage would actually look like on a real city. Halifax became one of the few real-world data points they had. Engineers studied photographs, damage radius, and survivor accounts, using the pattern of flattened buildings and the physics of that 1917 shockwave to help estimate how buildings and human bodies might respond to a nuclear detonation. A wartime shipping accident in a Canadian harbour had unintentionally become a reference point for calculating the destructive power of the deadliest weapon ever built. So a fog-slowed misjudgment between 2 ship captains ended up rewriting emergency medicine, birthing pediatric surgery, and giving nuclear physicists their first real preview of mass destruction. Halifax rebuilt. The Richmond district became a model neighborhood, and disaster relief systems pioneered their shaped how modern cities respond to catastrophe today. But strip away the science and the history, and one detail still lingers. An entire generation of children carried the physical scars of a war they never fought in, wounded not on a battlefield, but by a window they were curious enough to stand beside. Sometimes the most devastating lessons in human history come not from the weapons we build for war, but from the ordinary, careless moments when we forget how much destructive power we're quietly carrying past each other. Subscribe for more stories like this.